For the past 2 years during this pandemic, I've heard a range of emotions from Anglicans, from the initial fear and anxiety to determination and courage, from discouragement and fatigue to even anger and grief. But in the last little while, as vaccines have rolled out, infection numbers drop, churches, schools, and businesses start to reopen, as a new normal starts to emerge, we're starting to hear something new: hope. Hope is bubbling up again and people are starting to dream. I want to hear about those dreams. I believe in dreams and I believe that God speaks to us through dreams. Where is God leading us next? As we come out of this pandemic, what is next for us? On Thursday, March the 10th, we will be starting a new weekly lunch hour online gathering called Tending the Soul. It's a series of honest and hopeful conversations for the church and its leaders about ministry in this time. Every Thursday at noon, live streamed over our Facebook page, a small group will discuss with me or one of our other bishops what's changed in our church and what are we learning. Where are we finding abundance in the face of disruption? What do we imagine for the future? Each hour-long session will include a conversation between church leaders, both lay and ordained, on a particular topic, with plenty of time for questions and discussion. Together, we'll hear some of the stories and best ideas from across the diocese. We'll share what's tough in ministry these days, and also how we see the future unfolding. We'll talk about some of the common questions, opportunities, and challenges facing our church. And we will support each other, because honestly, we're all in this together. None of us is alone. We want to create a space for conversation that is both honest and hopeful. So please join us every Thursday at noon starting on March the 10th on the Diocesan Facebook page. For the full list of dates and topics, check out our events calendar listing on our website, toronto.anglican.ca. I look forward to seeing you online for these Tending the Soul conversations as we share our dreams, seed our imaginations, and discern together what God is calling us to do, to be, and to become as Christ's church in the Diocese of Toronto.
Well, welcome everybody. This is our fourth session of Tending the Soul, and today we're touching on the theme of pastoral visiting. The exact title of our presentation today is Reconnecting with Our Congregations, the Art of the Pastoral Visit, and Dealing with Pandemic Grief and Vulnerability. And I am delighted to have with us today Bishop Ursula, Joe Davies, and Alvardo Adderley. And just by way of introduction, I'm going to do an introduction of both Joe and Alvardo first, and then I'm going to invite Bishop Ursula to begin with an opening prayer. And so I'm really delighted that Joe could be with us. Reverend Canon Joe Davies is a Dawson chaplain working at St. John's Rehab. She's an oblate with the Sisters of St. John the Divine. And at St. John's Rehab, she's the chaplain and spiritual care coordinator working with the sisters who are spiritual care providers. She has been a full-time hospital chaplain throughout the time she has been in ordained ministry and for 10 years previously as a layperson. She collaborated with Professor Wanda Malcolm on the creation of a course with the Toronto School of Theology on advanced pastoral care. The majority of the students are postulants to the priesthood, and the students do their placement for the course at St. John's Rehab, and Joe is their supervisor. Joe is also the chair of the Bishop's Committee on Healing Ministries. And Alberta Adderley is actually new to the diocese. He is currently the incumbent at the parish of Fenelon Falls, originally hailing from Turks and Caicos Islands. He's been a cleric for the last 12 years and is currently working on his doctorate at Tyndale Tyndale Seminary. We're delighted that Alvardo is with us in the diocese, that he is enthusiastic about serving the ministry in the Trent-Durham Episcopal area and the good people at the parish of Fenelon Falls. We're delighted to have the two of you with us in addition to Bishop Priscilla, and I'm going to pass things over to her now for an opening prayer.
Thank you so much. As we give thanks for Alvardo's ministry, we recognize also that Coboconk is part of that parish.
Absolutely.
Giving thanks for those good people as well. We'll open with a prayer, and then I just have a few words to say to set the tone a little bit for our conversation. This is a prayer from a resource called Liturgies from Below, praying with the people at the ends of the world. We have a lot on our hearts and minds this day as we talk about connecting and reconnecting in pastoral visiting, but as there's a lot going on in the world around us, we'll just take a quiet moment, collect ourselves. Be blessed, you who move. Be blessed, you who mourn. Be blessed, you who are meek and merciful, for you are the power of God. Amen. Thank you. Yeah, so today we come together, tending our souls, talking about connecting and reconnecting. And as we transition in this COVID journey from pandemic to endemic, our God of love and life is with us, leading us in our connecting and our reconnecting. And sometimes what can feel like Ezekiel's valley of dry bones can also yield new things for us, because this has also been a time of some reawakening for some people. And so when we talk about reconnecting pastorally, we also leave wide open that opportunity for people connecting maybe for the first time or for the first time in a long time with their parishes and their parish ministries. And let's have a conversation about that.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Bishop Priscilla. For those who are new with the format, what we do is we have the two presenters have opening comments for about 5 to 7 minutes each. And we also invite commentary from people who are viewing us. So if you're using the Facebook platform or if you're watching on YouTube, you're welcome to make comments. We'll pass those comments along as appropriately to those of us who are present here today. And we'll have a conversation and we'll discuss how pastoral care has changed and what's happening in pastoral care during the pandemic. I'm going to invite at this point Joe Davies to unmute herself and to I welcome you to Tending the Soul, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I suppose a lot of what I'm going to say is probably around the art of pastoral care. I'm going to begin with two quotations. The first one's from Beverly Lanzetta, and she says, "Spiritual guidance is attentive to helping a person with their relationship with ultimate reality, however named or defined, holding space for the stirring of the spirit, fostering communion between the person and the divine, to aid in enlightening the soul, to unite in mystical union with God, To listen for this movement is what the pastoral person does, bringing awareness to the transformative changes affecting the person. And another quote from Samuel Wells. He says, being with. So that's a very big, important phrase in pastoral care. Being with involves presence, which means being there with someone. It involves attention, mystery. So don't waste energy pursuing solutions for someone as they enter into a greater mystery. It involves delight, rejecting how things should be, but opening up to surprise, to humor, to subversion, and even playfulness, and to be glad to take the time with someone. Participation. So don't leave someone behind. Engage with the person on their journey. Partnership. In fact, especially in a parish, naming gifts, welcoming someone to the community, naming gifts they don't hear themselves. Enjoyment. So enjoying people for who they are. And finally, the last word, glory, to experience God with us. When the pandemic was named as a pandemic about 2 years ago, March 2020, I was here at Chaplain, and it seemed one day it was not here. We were just kind of worried, very worried. And the next day it was a pandemic and we had to make decisions. And one of the first decisions that happened is that they decided, since the sisters all lived together in congregate living, they were very vulnerable. So they were suggested they go home for their own safety. That was hard for them, but they did. And I was then alone. And that was really hard. I like to be with people. And I was alone and I had to visit patients and work out how to do that. But at the same time, the hospital began screening people as they entered the building. And you couldn't just put up signs. And they didn't have anybody hired at the time. So they seconded several physiotherapists and occupational therapists. And God bless them, they didn't second me as such. They came and begged me, could you please? Of course I could. So suddenly I was thrown into this world, this chaplain, where I was seeing patients in the morning and screening in the afternoon for 4 hours. At first, we didn't wear masks. We just distanced from people. And then suddenly masks, we were told we had to have a mask on all the time. At first, we had like a tiny little plexiglass thing. And then we had a wobbly big one. And then we had a permanent one. We didn't know how it was transmitted. So we were cleaning anything anybody brought into the hospital. No visitors were allowed. So lots of things were coming in, washing down. And people were watching us wash down things that they had preciously wrapped. It was very difficult. We had to investigate every bag. At first, we would only accept prepackaged food because at least we knew that that had been safe and enclosed and not touched. Sometimes people tried to bring in somebody's whole living room. I had people bringing in big televisions. Because visitors weren't allowed in, we sent them to patients' windows. We coordinated that. You can go to the window and wave. If they were on the lower floor, they could go to the window and peek in and kind of yell through the window. It was really hard. And people were desperately sad and they were angry mixed with that sadness. And I felt like I was a security guard and I'm a chaplain. And I felt out of my depth and far from the image that I have as a pastoral person. So I went away and talked to myself, as I am wont to do, and I talked to many other people too. And I realized that even though I was screening, I was still with people. And I needed to be aware fully of their presence and be completely present to them. All those practicalities around the virus, all the things that we slowly learned, all about transmission, I needed to know about that. It was really important so that I could support that and help someone, but also to listen to them and how all of that was reflecting inside for them. And I slowly began to see that there were possibilities here for just in those few minutes for some small amounts of healing and a time of understanding and of tending the soul. And it made a huge difference to me in that time of panic, basically, at listening to people, loving them, and knowing God loving them. And even sometimes, as I screamed, saying those words, that God loves them. So to be pastoral is about relationship, to be always with God, to know we are beloved of God, and to say that. And God desires our love, and God desires us to love our neighbor. All of that is intertwined in being pastoral. To be pastoral, again, is about being with God, being with community, being with ourselves. Being pastoral is a dance of all of those together. Actually providing pastoral care rather than just being pastoral. A pastoral visit is the intentional awareness, a magnifier of all of that, if you will, of what being with means when we are caring for another person. It is support and kindness, those two easy, simple things we think, but that is a skill to learn as well, and an art. It is being entirely present for someone. It is empathic listening. It is a friendly and warm curiosity about the other person, especially if they're different. It is generous listening with unconditional and loving regard to hold space so someone can hear themselves, come to know that they are beloved, and so that they can hear themselves with God, and sometimes to hear themselves as God knows them. And often this is all for the first time. I think it's also really important to understand that spirituality is the context from where people express their faith or their belief or their values. And what is sacred to me may not be sacred for someone else. So pastoral care involves listening to their sacredness. It's always the thread of connection that unpacks and opens up the sacred for someone else. When we make a visit, when we provide pastoral care for someone, we really aren't, and I have to remember this, it's hard sometimes, especially when we hear different comments, we're not addressing their doctrinal understanding of the church at all. We are there to listen how someone makes meaning or seeks meaning for themselves, and to repeat again for them to hear themselves, to question and see themselves, to be on a journey to know themselves again as God knows them, to support embracing their coping. Sometimes people don't realize that they have these coping skills, to embrace it, but also to be with them as they might realize that their current coping methods are damaging, and to be with someone as they realize that all can change at any time, and change can begin with heartbreak, joy, grief, pain, illness, and indiscernment. And all did change for us. Just to go back to where I started with that March 2020, the pandemic arrived. And life as we fashioned it changed. Pandemic grief of individuals and of communities caused by all of these things in the pandemic. The loss of a loved one from COVID, or the loss of a loved one that we couldn't be with, the loss of a job, the loss of connection. We are incarnated beings, embodied spirits, and even the shyest, most introverted amongst us would call being with something that is needed or known to be available. Loss or harm to relationships came about. There was academic loss, whole years for students, loss experienced by healthcare providers, loss of our rituals and our routines that help us feel safe, loss of mental health support. So pastoral care, in providing it, acknowledges all this grief, names it, and sits with it. And in that divine space of holding and being with, it can light up, pastoral care can light up hope, creativity, possibilities that we would never have thought of, and resiliency in change and in new beginnings. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. Before I go to Alvardo, I'm going to just give Bishop Priscilla an opportunity. She has a question that she wants to ask you.
You do?
I do. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe. I know Samuel Wells is a great writer. He also wrote a book called A Future That's Bigger Than the Past, and it's
Yeah.
talking about the future of our church. How do we get outside our church buildings and into the communities? It's a beautiful thing. He's a good, deep thinker, and I really liked what you said about the being with. That he calls us to. And it occurs to me to ask you, and this is a tough question, it's a personal question, but
Oh,
what happens inside you, just speaking personally, what happens inside you when you be with others?
no. Oh, there's a sense of growth of soul inside of me.
Yeah.
When I was very young, I used to have these dreams of beautiful things. And then when I would wake, I used to feel like my hands had expanded in my head and my arms and my legs. And I think that that's a version of that. And that my soul expands, and the compassion and love that grows just from being with someone is amazing. And that is healing for me. And it's sort of a sidebar. It's a healing for me to go on to the next person. So even if their story is devastating,
Right.
when I am intentionally with someone, there's a growth within my soul. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I invite Alvardo. You got some time with us now.
Thank you, Peter. Just one correction. I'm originally from the Bahamas.
Oh, my
That's
apologies.
important.
One
It is.
one small correction. As I heard Reverend Joe speak, especially quoting Samuel Wells, being with, it really stood out to me because for the first time in my ministry, I have never ever felt disconnected to people. I actually like the message translation of the incarnation. It says, "The word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood." It is so intimate, and it speaks exactly to who and what God is calling us to be at this moment, at this time. And the ministry of the incarnation has become so important for me. Just going beyond the veil, going beneath the surface, being with people in their most vulnerable and sensitive moments. We had a bishop in the Bahamas who always said, a homegoing priest makes a church-going people. And that is so true. And just to give you a light moment, I remember visiting someone right here in Canada. And when I went to the house, the little boy saw me, and I wasn't in collar, and I wasn't in my robes. And he said, "Father, you wear jeans." I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, I did not know you wear human clothes." And I smiled, but in his innocence, he said something that was very profound. For the first time, he perhaps identified myself with him, with a human being. And I think that's one of the strengths of not only pastoral presence, but that is the strength of the pandemic and where we find ourselves. I'm able to sit in people's living rooms, in people's front rooms, in some cases, even in people's bedrooms, that I perhaps never, ever would have had a chance to do it. But I'm moving into a new diocese, a new context, a new community, and I've never ever had this intimate feeling as now. And then it is good because I'm able to be authentic. People are able to learn Alvaro Adderley versus Father Adderley. They're able to hear my likes and my dislikes. And one of the things I do with the congregation, I tell them, when I come to your house, we are not going to talk about church. I want to talk about basketball. I want to talk about poutine. I want to talk about Canadian stuff I don't know. And I want to tell you about the Bahamian stuff you don't know. Let's talk about the sun, the sand, the beach. And what it does, it moves people away from the hurt and pain. And then it helps us to find light moments in what we do. A theologian by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about the ministry of presence. And it teaches me that I don't always have to say the Lord be with you. I don't always have to pray. Sometimes I just have to be present and not say a word. The ministry of silence, the ministry of presence, the ministry of just being with, just being there. And that has become so important for me because I realize we all are vulnerable right now. I mean, as a priest, I am tired with Zoom meetings. I'm tired recording. It's emotionally and mentally draining. And sometimes even when I say that, I think people get a glimpse of the human being within me. Yes, I love reaching out. I'm an extrovert. I love people. But I hate these barriers that have been created, or I dislike that stops me from hugging Peter or hugging Joe or just being in people's presence. But I also appreciate what it has done. Standing at the back door of a church, I can ask Rusilla how she's doing, and she can answer me and move on. But sitting in a front room, watching your body language, listening to your intonations and the way in which you answer me, I now get a better understanding of how you really feel. And I get a chance to minister from a place of authenticity because I can say, I heard too. And I too never thought that this pandemic would have been 2 years, or financially I'm touching into savings that I had for retirement. And I'm scared. I feel lost. I feel wounded. I feel hurt. And I think when we connect with people on that level, COVID is doing a good thing for us. And it's difficult to say that because we only look at the bad. But COVID has shown us our strengths, and it has indeed showed us our weaknesses. But we must embrace this moment and see where we can build from it rather than just complaining. So I'm enjoying it.
That's good.
I thank you for that. It occurred to me that obviously during the last 2 years, much of our conversation and engagement has been actually through platforms such as this. It's been on Zoom, it's been on other sort of platforms. And I wonder how you're able to make a virtual platform an opportunity for intimacy. How do you do it? Is it different than actually meeting face to face? And how have you've had to use it? So what's it been like using this sort of platform to do pastoral ministry?
Well, for me, before going into seminary, I had a radio background. So I think it's being able to just be personal. Language is important. Looking at the camera is important. Um, and just make people feel as though you're speaking directly to them.
Right.
And I think that helps a lot.
I've been lucky in that I haven't had to see my patients virtually. So I've been able to go into the rooms. I mean, I'm covered. I have a big face shield over me and a mask and quite often a gown, but I'm at least present in the room. But I found we did the course that I do, Advanced Pastoral Care, was all taught entirely on Zoom. We had to delay the students arriving, so we did a lot of extra things on Zoom, and exactly what Alberto was saying, trying to be as personal as possible, and if possible for me, to be more open than I might think of when I'm present with someone, so that it can actually get through the screen that yes, I'm here with you, I am with you.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been also an interesting opportunity to actually really connect with people who are at a far distance from me, whether they be around the diocese or, internationally somehow. There's been a way to actually connect with people in a way that I wouldn't unless I was going to visit them. And so I've benefited from that. And I think that that's one of those silver linings in the COVID cloud, as they say. But one of the challenges that we discovered through pastoral care and also through working from home and working in a context of being in Zoom land is that we have an understanding very often about what our frame of reference is, what our work hours are, what our workplace is, and that all got blown out of the water by Zoom and by this opportunity to connect in this way. And I think as we lean back into meeting in person and we lean back into finding ways to actually physically get together, I think there's going to be a bit of a challenge for some people first of all, they're going to find that the time it takes to travel somewhere is occupying all the time they were getting things done
Right.
in the meantime.
Sure.
But then also, there's going to be less of an intimacy for some people because it's, I'm in my work shirt again and I'm showing up and we have a business agenda and we have items to cover. And it's different than when we were just kind of having our coffee and chatting and the dog was barking in the background and you could see my masks or any number of things, right? So I think there's going to be a shift and a change that some people will have really appreciated the sort of intimacy provided by the screen that won't be there in the same way anymore. We did get on some levels a sense of the personality of the people in a different way than we never got before.
So true.
Yeah, I think so. I have to say that I was sometimes envious of people that, talked about all their soft pants they were wearing all the time. I'm like, well, that would be kind of nice. That would be nice. But then on the other hand, I was also, you're right, there were Zoom meetings at all times of day and it didn't matter. So that will be, as you say, difficult. But I really appreciated being able to meet with people because of the work that I do. And especially when it had to do with the church, I couldn't always have meetings at 2 in the afternoon from here, having to leave, but I could sneak them in a coffee break and do things like that while I was here. So that's been really wonderful. So I have made more connections with actually folks in the diocese than I've ever done before, right, because of all of this.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, and I can say, I mean, while I do appreciate a certain connectedness that Zoom provides, it allows us to meet with a wider group of people. I personally absolutely crave being in the company of other people. I found the first 2 months of the pandemic absolutely stifling. My wife says it actually changed my personality, that I became more inward looking and inwardly focused. And that's probably the case because I had to surrender being in the company of people. And very much part of being active in church life is being in the company of other people. I still don't find that this is an adequate way of celebrating church because I crave that sense of community. And I'm wondering, like, there still is a sense of inadequacy about using the platform, but I do appreciate the fact that it allows us to be able to connect with people in an audience such as the way that we're doing right now with Tending the Soul. Yes, as Cynthia Majeski says, it's a mixed blessing for extroverts.
The flip side to that too, Peter, is that sometimes in life when things are taken away from you, you appreciate it more.
Right.
And it helps us to really focus in on the things we once took for granted, whether it's relationships, whether it's gathering, whether it's just talking to people. We often say, we don't need nobody. I can do this all by myself. But we are realizing that we can't. And that's a wonderful thing that COVID has stripped us. It has made us vulnerable. But it has also given us an opportunity to reclothe ourselves with a different thinking, inwardly or outwardly.
Yeah, I was able in these last 2 years to actually really claim something that I think I was always aware of. Well, I must have been, otherwise I wouldn't have been an oblate with the sisterhood. But that I live a quiet life, actually, of my own. And I don't go out a lot, and I quite like it. As an extrovert, I quite like it. It's kind of a place of refuge and refreshment, and that I am way more reflective than if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, oh, yeah, I'm not really a very inward person. Now, because I'm an extrovert, the words don't go on in my head, but in the silence, I can feel them all. And then I can write them. So I learned that about me. And I was able to take that because, as I think I was saying earlier, that the only tool that we have in pastoral care is ourselves. So I was able to take that realization of myself, and without telling the story, to help patients who are intensely isolated. And in fact, because we have rooms with more than one person in, we often had to have curtains closed. People couldn't see the window, and the windows here at St. John's are magnificent. And they couldn't, so we couldn't even give them the gift that this wonderful hospital gives, looking out. To go in with people and talk to them about what they have within themselves and helping them discover what they have within themselves. And a lot of people have all sorts of reflective and meditative abilities that they don't know about. And we began with simple things, which you saw a whole bunch of it arising in the pandemic, with coloring, adult coloring. We would hand all of those out. I'd read things to people. Our library was closed, but we were able to bring books to people. And they were able to say to us, this is the kind of book I like, and this is why I like that book. And then they'd hear that, and we go, okay, I hadn't really thought about it. So all of those gifts come bubbling up that people just didn't know of themselves. It works the other way. Some people didn't know that they would hate being isolated. They thought that they would love it.
That grief, right? And vulnerability sometimes comes with the notion that they don't like what they see when they look inside, and they'd rather tune it out. And that's where the spiritual care can be really, really important.
Yes.
I smile because I can relate to you, Peter. When the pandemic first happened, I was presently in Turks and Caicos, because it's the Diocese of the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos.
Got it.
And the third day, I went into the front room. I took the TV off the wall. I took it outside, and I watched TV outside just to feel as though I went out.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself talking to it?
No.
So we have a specific question. This comes from MJ Wilson, and he's wondering, how do we discern community members who might have the skills for pastoral care, and what type of training might be available for lay people? Great question.
So, well, in the diocese, we do have a training program. Yes, we actually have that available, that we will provide leaders to facilitate that and provide the program, and I can set it up so that it works for the context of the parish as well. So there is that, and I can also, as a resource from our committee, we can support a parish that wants to create their own, and how they would do that. Discerning community members. I mean, you have to talk about pastoral care, talk about what the art of pastoral care is, talk about stories. What did you receive when you received pastoral care? Although I often find it mysterious when I'm in the hospital that a lot of people haven't had a lot of intimate pastoral care, where you're actually right there at the bedroom. But as we've just heard, I think that will change after the pandemic. But so have to help people, give them discerning tools, give them reflective tools, meditative tools, journaling. And the first day of the pastoral course talks about that, on how to reflect on pastoral care. And also people can take the whole course and realize at the end of it that this is not for them, but maybe there's a branch of pastoral care. And that's okay too.
Right.
That's okay too.
I would say there's also an element of community discernment that's necessary in such a thing. And sometimes somebody feels called to do a particular ministry in a parish, but the parish doesn't necessarily affirm it in that way. And that doesn't mean that they're not called, but it's around vocational discernment on many levels. And I think it's one of those things where they need to be in a prayerful state, and they need to approach their priest, and they need to approach the leadership of the parish, who would probably be the wardens and the advisory board, and just sort of present their case that this is my discernment process, not fait accompli, this is who I'm called to be, but I'm discerning a call to this, and is it affirmed by my community? Sometimes too, when people are not affirmed by their community, they do proceed in producing or providing what they believe is pastoral care. And frankly, such amazing stories have come out of that with God's grace that I think, how can we be generous in in helping people to pursue what they feel called to do, but also help to frame it so that it's as supported and as structured as possible in a good way to benefit the larger whole.
Yes, because if we're doing pastoral care within the community, it's the community that's going to receive it. So we need to be able to hear from that. And that there's a pastoral part in actually listening to that discernment on the part of the leader.
That is not an easy thing to do when somebody feels called and then it's not affirmed for them that, no, we don't think that is your gift. But also, how can they learn it, right? Like, how can they learn more about it if they're really feeling passionate about it?
Yeah, so
Alvaro?
reading.
Yeah, well, exactly. And taking Joe's course. Alvaro, did you have some thoughts on that?
No, that is so true. That is so true. Sometimes I feel as people who feel called to a vocation, we have to sometimes get beyond ourselves and really listen to the still voice of God and hear where God is guiding and directing us. I know when I first expressed interest to be a priest, a very elderly bishop then asked me, what could you do as a priest that you cannot do now? And I was so angry
I
at
think
the
we've
question.
all heard that question.
I was so angry at the question because is he trying to trap me? I want to be a priest. But after the interview finished and I really sat with the question, I really heard what he was saying to me. And it was so true, because we can feel called, but it could be to a priesthood, it could be to the diaconate, it could be to the ACW, it could be to the lay readers, but not all of us are called for a particular ministry. And sometimes to really get that answer, we have to get beyond ourselves, be still, and hear what God is actually saying to us, and even saying to us through other people.
Yeah, through the community is really, really important. That's how we do things in the Anglican Church.
And through other people too, because sometimes people, when they feel called to pastoral care, there's a kindness within them and a desire to do good for people. But the actual pastoral care involves so much more. So going back to the art of it, that the people don't often know, which is why I say you can take the course because you have an interest or desire, and then the discernment will come through the course as well. Yeah.
For sure. Something that Alvaro said earlier that I just wanted to ask Peter about is, Alvaro, you mentioned when you're doing your pastoral visiting, sometimes people talk about money, and money is very often where we hear people's grief or their vulnerability. And frankly, coming through the pandemic, there's been a lot of anxiety for a lot of people around finances. If anybody's looking to buy or rent a home now, good luck with that. Yep. Groceries are going up. Number of people have lost jobs or transitioned jobs. Money is a really important part of our spiritual health. So, Peter, can you talk to us a little bit about that as the director of stewardship?
I think money is a vulnerability for a lot of people. It's something that they don't, it seems to be a taboo subject in many cases. It's not something that people want to share. They're more than happy to share some of their own deepest and most intimate aspects about their life before they'll talk about their financial circumstances. I know that when I speak to people about money, it's always our generosity is deeply rooted to supporting ministry, but I never tell people that they're going to be somehow minimalized in the eyes of God because of their giving. That each gift, Henry Nouwen talks about how being given the opportunity to give is a sacred invitation to something that is larger than ourselves. God knows what's in our hearts. He knows what we're capable of. People who are going through difficult financial circumstances or are unemployed, I really say to them, pray for the ministry of the church. Find ways that you can support the church through your time and talent. As your circumstances in life change, then you can reevaluate your capacity to give of your money. But it has to go beyond that we're not going to be held to such a high standard, because you can't outgive God in the first place. So we don't have to worry about trying to achieve that standard of giving. God knows what's in our hearts. He knows what we're capable of. I just ask people to find ways that they can engage in ministry, and don't abandon the church, please, because you're not in a position to give financially. That should never be a reason not to be part of the church community. Yeah, giving is important, and we need money to support our important ministries, but it should not stand in the way of relationship.
So,
And I
Peter,
thank you for that question, because I think that's a
Yeah.
really critical and important thing for people to know.
Yeah.
I think what has happened to Peter when we often mention stewardship, it's only the treasure
Yep.
people here. I
Yep.
think we ought to remind them your time, your
Yep.
talent, and your treasure.
Yep.
So
Absolutely important.
yeah.
Yet ironically, clergy and lay people tend to only turn to me when they want to address the treasure component. Yet it's so important for people to hear the message that stewardship is not, it's not just about money. It's about, who's the steward? The steward is the person as the tender of the household. They're
Mhm.
responsible for more aspects of the household than just the financial ones. They're involved in the foundation, the upkeep, the total upkeep, and that requires maintenance. It requires our responsibility to the different priorities that are required in the household. It's about harmonious relationship as well. And so I think there are, the church deals with a lot of people who are experiencing deep-seated woundedness in their lives. And the last thing I want is for money to be a source of that wound as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's spirituality and wealth and health are so intertwined.
Yeah, I typically tell people and encourage people to give proportionately. That way, like, there's no sort of, this is the standard in which you need to achieve. I keep going back to the importance of recognizing that God knows what our capacity is,
Mhm.
and let's not be too hard on ourselves when it comes to our capacity to be generous.
Not only that, Peter, stewardship is a way of life.
It is, absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
That encompasses the whole man, and I can speak for me.
And woman.
When
And women. Person.
When I know personally of God's grace, mercy, and His goodness to me, my response will measure that.
That's right. And you know that through good pastoral care, right?
It's all connected. I love it.
It's all connected. And because
Right.
that's about discovering that I was a young woman with 2 children, a single mother, very poor. I'm not rich now, but compared to that. And if it hadn't been for the church providing me with the best pastoral care possible, so some of that may be around my call, I would have felt that I was so much less than everyone around me who had a lot of money. It just happened to be the parish I was in, had a lot of money, but I received the best pastoral care from everyone. And I realized the whole time and talent that I could give, that was what I could give. And when I could give money, I gave a little bit. And I felt always appreciated and always loved, which reminded me of all that mercy and compassion that is of God.
So for me, that is the point. When we close our eyes and remember the feeling of being taken care of,
Yeah.
that is what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
So I have another question that's come up amongst the comments, and it's a lot of people have felt disconnected by the pandemic, and they feel that they've been away from the church for such a long period of time. What is your advice for reaching out pastorally to these folks? How do we reach out? How do we connect with people who have felt disconnected from the church?
Alberto?
For me personally, this is one of the beauties, I would say, living in the country. The church is still very much a part of the community. People don't drive in and drive out as they walk in the city congregation. So for me, for instance, St. James is on Bond Street East. I will go above board and say everyone from east to west on Bond Street knows me, whether they're Anglican or not. I walk into people's homes and I just chat. And as I said before, it's not a chat about church, and it's not even a chat about God. It's just how are you?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the connection or the reconnection happens, when people see that you are genuinely asking, how are you?
Right.
I'm not concerned about offering. I'm not concerned about church attendance. They will come. But how are you doing? How do you feel about the vaccine? How do you feel about the booster shot? And we really get to talk. How are you feeling about Russia and Ukraine?
Right.
Have you watched the news today? I like Seinfeld, a sitcom. I like the Golden State Warriors. No, I'm serious. It's a matter of people literally seeing us as human beings. They don't see
Mhm.
me in a chasuble. They don't see me in a cassock. They don't see me in a collar. Those things have their place. But when they see me for who I am, and I see them for who they are, I think that's when the connection happens.
If I could say, some people haven't been very good at staying connected with their church communities, and
Sure.
every day is a new day. So be inspired. Pick it up right now. Pick up the phone. Make that connection right now. Start from now if you haven't been doing it all the way along.
Yeah. Most people that I meet here in the hospital don't have a church connection. You might have a memory of a childhood connection once, or they kind of know that there's a church over there. So those are the people, the majority of the people that I see here. But as a chaplain, the meaning of chaplain, it comes from St. Martin of Tours, all about his cape, which is where the word chaplain comes from. And wherever we go, we wear the chapel on our back. It doesn't mean that we begin all the people expect of church, but we're wearing the chaplain, all that it represents on our back, all that love, all that connection that everyone is speaking about. So that's what I take into the space. And I may be this person who's the chaplain, who is very upfront, because it's important to me to be transparent who I am. As an Anglican, even with people of no faith, and they're always just really appreciative that I will be upfront, and that's what I'm carrying into the room, and that's what's calling me into the room, to hear and know them and bring the chapel on my back in there. And people are moved by that desire for intimacy, that desire to know them, and my willingness to ask them about any experiences they've had of what they might call God and the divine, and to actually be intimate with people.
Yeah.
And because really, I think the church, with good skills and good understanding, is the only institution that can be intimate with people, and we need to strive more for that. And I offer people, after a while, I never use prayer for manipulation because it can be manipulative. I have to wait for a moment, and I may offer to pray, and the most amazing people that I would never have thought of will say, well, please, sure, go ahead, give it a go. And I pray for them, and there are always tears at that moment. So connecting pastorally means being with, bringing ourselves as humans, as though created by God, and bringing our God, our sense of God, and our love that we receive into that space with them.
Samantha Caravan raises another important question, and it's about the pain that people feel about not returning to the same church that they had before the pandemic. And so even when change is about growth, grief is present. Even when change is about live streaming and radio shows, there is a grief of what has been lost and cannot be retrieved. And I think there are people who are just striving to return to the way things were.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we can ever go back to that.
No, and that's the thing about grief, is that doesn't go away. And there are many things that we cannot go back to. And that's where deep pastoral care has to come in, because that grief doesn't go away. It revisits us time and time again and brings memories. So we're not there. Pastoral care is never there to remove that. It's there to say, you carry this into your rest of your life. How is that going to inform you? So in experience, I mean, it's not that we don't sit with the grief, we do, but then how do we take that grief into a different space, a different church, a different community, and in fact, become part of the community. So bring that grief in and bring some growth to yourself into there.
It's also recognizing that God is doing a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be ever so careful that when it comes to our spiritual lives, we don't have detachment issues. Different doesn't necessarily means wrong. It simply means this is a new way of doing something.
Yeah.
And when I look at the Anglican faith, um, no one is more diverse than us.
That's correct.
We have so many ways of experiencing God, and perhaps COVID is only adding to that element. Um, I heard someone liken the Anglican faith to a buffet. All are welcome, and whatever it is you may like, you are free to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to move forward. We cannot find ourselves like the Old Testament people saying to the bishops or to the clergy, we could have stayed right in Egypt and died. We have to move forward. COVID is here, yes, but God is still real. COVID is
Mm-hmm.
COVID is here, yes, but we cannot allow our faith to be overtaken by fear. This is where the message of hope must be consistent and must be heard, and people have to see us as leaders smiling in the storm. Yes, I'm scared. Yes, I may be confused, but I have hope. I have faith. Um, as a child reading the Bible, I always wondered, how can prophets call rain from heaven with fire? How can manna come from above? And how could Moses part the Red Sea? And the answer is hope and faith,
Right.
right? So sometimes triumph is birthed from destruction.
Yep.
Joseph,
Yes.
So,
Joseph was betrayed by his brothers. He was thrown into a pit. He was sold into slavery. He was imprisoned. He was falsely accused for rape. But the end of the story, he became the governor of Egypt.
so that's really important because I think, thank you so much for your reflections on that, both of you. We're fundamentally changed by the grief that we
Yeah.
experience.
Right.
And I think that that's a clear illustration of that. Yeah. We
So
are different because
Yeah.
of that grief.
We are very quickly coming to the end of our presentation today. I do want to ask, though, Joe and Alvaro, one final question, and that is, what do you find most gratifying or most rewarding in your pastoral ministry? Let's end on a high note here. We've talked about grief and we've talked about some difficult channels in people's lives. What for you is the high note of pastoral ministry?
Joe?
Well, I'm sitting there. A high note. It's
All
actually,
of it.
It is. It's all of it. I love everything that I do. I love coming into work. It never occurs to me to think, getting up in the morning is not the best thing, but I have to say, there is a high note for me for the last 2-3 years, actually a little bit before that, in doing the course and being with students.
Right.
That is a very big high note, and all that I've learned. I know it's it's a thing we say, but it's true. All that I've learned from the students pushes me to express myself and express myself from my heart. So that's been a huge high note because, in a lot of ways with students, what I hope I'm doing is also providing pastoral care.
Right.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
The high note for me has been leading from a place of authenticity, being able to connect with people in my vulnerable state, in my brokenness, connecting with people even in a unfamiliar territory.
Yeah.
I've lived in the Bahamas all of my life, so relocating is not only a new context, it's not only a new ministerial environment, but it is new in every sense of the word.
It's huge. Yes.
I have read the story of Abram all my life, but never have I ever thought I would have actually been him. I have come to an unknown land, and the high note for me is people treating me like one of their own, people seeing me for who I am, and just being able to do ministry without the skip of a beat.
Oh, it's a joy listening to you, Alberto. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You know what?
You.
I delight in the conversation that we've had the last hour. It has been really fruitful, and I know that there's been a lot of positive feedback from this. I look forward to the next session. We next meet on April 28th when we talk about speaking to the Spirit. So we're taking a bit of a break because there's all sorts of Lenten preparation and preparation for Easter coming up. So given people's calendars, we had to make that sort of adjustment. So we look forward to being back in about a month's time. And I give the final word to Bishop Priscilla as we end our presentation this afternoon.
Thank you so much. It has been a privilege and a delight to enter into these conversations together. Thank you. And we pray that anybody who's been listening and tuning in has also been inspired by our conversation, and maybe it'll help you move along a little bit in your pastoral care, either asking for it from somebody who serves and offers pastoral care or offering pastoral care yourself. We'll close with prayer. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone. Great conversation.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you all.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.